with a tool called a laryngoscope, or we can use one of these mirrors and tilt it down to look at the larynx and the vocal cords. Some people call this indirect laryngoscopy. Now, when you put a mirror into the back of the throat, there's going to be a tendency for that mirror to fog up really quickly. So you won't be able to see a thing. So what you have to do is either warm up the mirror, you can use a flame, and then touch it to the back of your hand, make sure it's not too high. So you want to bring the mirror up to body temperature so it doesn't fog, or you can use a solution on it. They make an anti-fog solution that you put on the mirror. Because otherwise it'll fog up and you can't see anything. But you can direct it down the laryngeal pharynx into the pharynx so you can see the vocal cords. Okay? That opening between the vocal cords within the larynx is called the glottis. Yeah, I said it. Glottis. Glottis. So we see the mirror being directed down into the pharynx, and then here's where the vocal cords are. What do you call inflammation or infection of the vocal cords? Laryngitis. Laryngitis. Because the vocal cords are part of the larynx. So your voice becomes hoarse. So the larynx is going to sit between the nasal pharynx and the trachea. Okay. It's tethered to the hyoid bone above. Remember, here's skinny. Here's the hyoid bone. The larynx is fixed or tethered to that hyoid bone. And the larynx has a framework of 9 cartilages. It includes 3 pairs of tiny cartilages, as well as 3 larger cartilaginous structures. One of those cartilaginous structures we've already been introduced to. It's called the epiglottis. It serves as a valve. The epiglottis is made out of what specific type of cartilage? Not hyaline.
Elastic.
Elastic. Remember, for elastic cartilage, you have all your E's. Eustachian tube, external auditory canal, the ear itself, and the epiglottis. If it begins with an E, elastic. Whereas the other cartilages that make up the larynx, those are all hyaline. Okay? Another important one is the shield-like cartilage that forms the Adam's apple. That's called the thyroid cartilage. And then finally, the inferiormost cartilage is a ring of cartilage called the cricoid cartilage that connects the larynx to the trachea. So those 3 are very important. The epiglottis, the thyroid cartilage, and the cricoid cartilage. Okay. Now, the purpose of the larynx, one of the main purposes, is to house the vocal cords which vibrate and produce speech. We mentioned the fact that during swallowing, the larynx is pulled up, and the epiglottis serves as a valve to protect the larynx, so food and beverage don't enter. Okay, so here's a view of the hyoid bone. You can see the epiglottis projecting upward here. This is the thyroid cartilage. This is the largest cartilaginous structure within the larynx. I said it looks shield-like. It's what forms the Adam's apple. In fact, this anterior projection of the thyroid cartilage is called the laryngeal prominence, and that's what forms the Adam's apple. Now, below the thyroid cartilage, this ring of cartilage here is the cricoid cartilage. You can see here that there's a thick membrane that extends from the thyroid cartilage to the hyoid bone. That's what tethers the larynx to the hyoid. This is called the thyrohyoid membrane. Thyrohyoid membrane. By the same token, there's the same membrane connective tissue connecting the cricoid to the thyroid. That's called the cricothyroid ligament. So in terms of the soft tissue structures, the name inferior to superior. Thyrohyoid, cricothyroid. The inferior-most structure is named first. And you can see how the cricoid cartilage is tethering then the larynx to the trachea below. If we were to take a mid-sagittal section through the larynx, okay, then you can see the vocal cords. Remember, vestibular folds are the false, two vocal cords are below. Cuneiform carniculate arytenoid cartilages. These are three tiny pairs of cartilages that function in movement of the vocal cords. I'm not going to ask you to memorize those. I want you to know those other three: epiglottis, thyroid cartilage, and cricoid. Okay. But again, these smaller cartilages plus the muscle within serve to move the vocal cords. So you can see that the vocal cords can be moved in and out. In fact, they can meet at the midline. Okay? Or they can open wide open. You can apply different degrees of tension to the cords to produce different sounds. For instance, and a good speech pathologist or a speech therapist will know what words to ask you to say to determine what kind of problem you're having. Okay? She'll be able to establish how well you can move the cords based on the sounds you can produce. So if she wants to see if you can bring a vocal cord to the midline and tense them up tightly, she'll say, okay, say ee, like that. Okay? Because to produce that sound, you have to bring the cords to the center and put more tension on them. If she wants you to see how wide open you can create them, you can move them, then she'll say, okay, say oh. So she'll ask you to make all kinds of crazy sounds. Okay, just to test the mobility, the movement of the cords. All right. Then from the larynx, we enter into the trachea. We think of those, and this is the beginning, by the way, the trachea is the beginning of what's called the lower respiratory tract, whereas up to the larynx, that's upper respiratory. We think of the trachea and the system of airways as being an inverted tree. Okay, so sometimes you'll hear the term tracheobronchial tree. It just refers to the system of airways that branch repeatedly, okay, carrying air to the alveoli. But it's kind of an inverted tree, with the trachea being the trunk. Are y'all following that analogy? Okay. So, okay, here's the basic trachea. It comes down like this. And we said it bifurcates. What's this area where it bifurcates? What is that called? Carina. And the primary bronchus on either side is going to carry air into the lungs. So let's draw a lung here. Draw another lung here. The left lung has two lobes, a left upper lobe and a left lower lobe. And they're separated by an oblique fissure. Whereas the right lung has three lobes. A right upper lobe, right middle lobe, and a right lower lobe. Okay. Now, you're going to have an oblique fissure. But in addition, to separate the lung into 3 lobes, you need a horizontal fissure. Okay. The primary bronchi is going to subdivide into 2 secondary bronchi in the left lung. 1 for each lobe. So you get the idea that the secondary bronchus serves the lobe. That's what it does. It's on the lobes. Whereas on the right side, so you have 1, 2, 3, is what I'm trying to say. 3 secondary bronchi, 1 for each lobe. If I do this right though, it's like this. There's nothing like that. Yeah. Okay. In fact, after this secondary bronchus to the upper lobe is given off, some people refer to this structure as a bronchus intermedius. Bronchus intermedius. And it gives off the second and the third secondary bronchus. So the idea is that the left lung has 2 secondary bronchi, the right lung has 3. Okay, 1 secondary bronchus for each lobe. This area of the lung here, where the bronchus is coming in, is the same area where the pulmonary artery enters and the pulmonary veins exit. We call this area along the medial aspect of the lung the hilum. H-I-L-U-M. Like, hilum! Okay. Some books will use the term hilus. H-I-L-U-S. I prefer the word hilum because that's what I'm more familiar with. So the vessels and the airways enter at the hilum. Okay. Now, the secondary bronchi are going to subdivide into tertiary bronchi. So it turns out that each of the lobes can be further subdivided into segments. You're not going to need to learn segments. But each of those segments is served by a tertiary bronchus. Okay? And with each new generation of bronchi, we go from primary to secondary to tertiary, it's like the branching of a tree. Each new branch that moves further out from the trunk gets progressively smaller or thinner. Once we reach a point where the airways are less than 1 millimeter in diameter, we no longer call them bronchi, but instead we use the term bronchioles. So when we use the term bronchioles, those are the tiniest of the airways. Now, the distal-most bronchioles, the ones that lead into the air sacs, are called respiratory bronchioles. Okay? Now, respiratory bronchioles oftentimes exhibit alveoli that branch directly or bud directly off of their walls, like this. But they also lead into sacs of alveoli, like this. So this would be a respiratory bronchiole. We say that respiratory bronchioles participate in gas exchange because they have alveoli that bud directly off their walls. In addition, they lead into these little passageways called alveolar ducts. This would be an alveolar duct. These little alveolar ducts are lined on either side by alveoli. This is like a little hallway, okay, from which alveoli emerge on either side of the hallway, like little rooms. Okay, so respiratory bronchioles have alveoli that bud off their walls, and they lead into alveolar ducts, okay, which carry air directly into the alveoli. So this group of alveoli here would be called an alveolar sac. It's composed of multiple alveoli. Now, surrounding these alveoli, you're going to have pulmonary capillaries like this. So that as air enters into the alveolus, the oxygen can cross the alveolar wall into the pulmonary capillary blood on the other side. At the same time, as oxygen is moving in one direction, CO2 is going to move in the opposite direction. What do we call this process, this gas exchange that occurs at the level of the alveolus?
External respiration.
External respiration. What's on your game today? You're
Yeah,
motivated
Sarah's
this
always
semester.
on her game.
Yeah, she is. She is. But I find her particularly motivated this semester. I don't know, maybe it's me. Have y'all noticed that?
I don't know.
Except for that one little screw up during practical. Okay. Except that one little screw up, she's doing really well. Okay. So here we look at the tracheobronchial trachea. Now, the trachea is supported by tracheal rings.